God.
You doing okay, sir?
No.
I understand. We're going to get you out there as quick as possible.
United States, North Canton is a city in central Stark County, Ohio. At the 2024 census, the population was 18,500. It is a suburb of the Canton-Massillon metropolitan area, a town where everything seemed out of place. And with hustle and bustle all around, a chilling story began to unfold. On an ordinary night, a brutal crime shrouded in mystery and horror was committed. The victim, a young woman known for her warmth and kindness, was found breathless. A story of insane obsession that turned to anger and anger to revenge. There are some people who are so deeply immersed in their dreams that for them, the line between the imaginary and the real becomes blurred. But what happens if such a dreamer tries to draw someone else into his illusions? Morgan Ashley Fox was born on August 2, 1991, in the small town of Canton, Ohio. From a young age, she was an obedient and calm child, a diligent student, and a loving daughter. Morgan had many friends and easily got along with any group. She was popular among her peers at school. As a teenager, she started dating a boy, and shortly after graduation, she found out she was pregnant. The young couple in love was over the moon with happiness. They had a daughter, whom they named Amelia. Because of her early pregnancy, Morgan did not enroll in college. Instead, she took a job as an operations manager for a delivery service. Here, during one of her shifts, she met Jason McDermott. He liked to play video games and spent most of his free time on the internet. After a while, he started bringing her food and drinks on every lunch break and talking about her nonstop to his friends and acquaintances. Colleagues eventually realized that Jason was genuinely fixated on Morgan. The impression from the outside was that it was as if the young people were involved in more than just friendship and socializing. In fact, his behavior resembled an obsessive crush, which alarmed some of his colleagues. The guy found Morgan's social media pages and started following her posts. He even installed a special app to monitor her activity confidentially. At times, Jason secretly recorded videos of the girl. Despite his fascination, he behaved in a friendly manner and did not bother Morgan to the point of causing her displeasure. In August 2020, Morgan brought her friend Mary to the company for training, and Mary ended up under Jason's supervision. The girl immediately noticed how often and how much he talked about Morgan. It was so intrusive that Mary suspected something was off and advised Jason to stop and cease tracking her friend. She wanted the guy to stop monitoring Morgan's social media pages and gradually distance himself from her in order to cope with his obsession. Mary knew about similar cases of stalking and understood that it could all end badly. Unfortunately, the secret admirer ignored this advice. Despite Mary's warnings, he constantly admired Morgan's beautiful hair, talked about her daughter, and everything related to the object of his desire. Jason clearly sought to develop a relationship and started with friendship. Now he had a new obsessive idea to ask Morgan out. He completely ignored the fact that the girl was already in a serious relationship, preparing for a wedding, and everything was going well with her fiancé. In June 2020, Morgan moved into a new house on Fraser Avenue with her fiancé and daughter, Amelia. To celebrate the housewarming and her birthday, our story's heroine decided to throw a party, inviting friends, relatives, and co-workers, including Jason. At that time, she considered him just a friend and was unaware of his obsession. For Jason, however, this invitation was another sign that Morgan was hiding her feelings for him. He had repeatedly shared his ideas about getting closer to the girl with other employees, but most doubted his plan would succeed. Of course, he ignored these warnings, as his own fantasies convinced him of the need to confess to his beloved. Jason decided to use the party to finally stop being just a friend and become Morgan's boyfriend. Jason acted like he was a member of the Morgan family at the party. The hidden admirer helped organize the party, served the food himself, and even struck up a conversation with Morgan's grandmother as if he were a member of the family. Overall, he was pleasant and accommodating, but his actions seemed strange and intrusive. Some of those present tried to find out the identity of this young man and whether he was romantically involved with Morgan. Morgan vehemently denied any romantic relationship with him, referring to Jason as just a good friend and co-worker. Most likely, it was very upsetting for the guy, because he was afraid of being rejected and never dared to declare his feelings openly. Later, an incident occurred that seriously damaged their friendly relationship. On October 8, 2020, Morgan briefly left her mobile phone unattended at work. Jason, knowing the password he had previously peeked at, took this opportunity to learn even more about his beloved on her device. He unexpectedly discovered intimate photos of Morgan and, being delighted, even showed them to other guys from the office. Upon returning to her workplace, the girl quickly realized that someone had used her phone and viewed the explicit pictures. This made her very angry. Jason was an obvious suspect because he was always near her desk. A coworker hinted to Morgan to pay attention to 3 young men who were discussing something near her seat while she was eating lunch. She approached them to ask, and they immediately ratted Jason out, claiming that he had done it. Morgan became furious and accused him of invading her privacy. Jason denied everything at first, but then succumbed to the pressure. Infuriated, Morgan stopped communicating with him and blocked him on social media. Finally, her eyes were opened to his unhealthy obsession and stalking of her. She heard from colleagues about his frank conversations and infatuation with her, which caused concern. Morgan knew about stalkers and was afraid of becoming a victim of one. Therefore, she completely cut off contact with Jason and even told colleagues about her desire to change jobs. Obviously, Morgan's reaction was not taken calmly by Jason. Although he understood his guilt, he assured the girl that he had only viewed her intimate photos but had not downloaded or shared them, although it later turned out to be untrue. However, Morgan was adamant in her decision to stay away from him. Meanwhile, Jason asked colleagues to help him restore communication with the girl. He wrote her a long letter of apology, which several acquaintances signed. In this message, he begged for forgiveness and asked to be unblocked on social media. Through the mediation of colleagues, he continued to bombard Morgan with messages and tried to call her, but was rejected every time. Jason's friends and coworkers noticed changes in his behavior and appearance. Literally the day after Morgan brushed him off, he became disheveled, unkempt, and ignored remarks from the department manager. It was evident that, due to the quarrel and obsession, Jason was barely sleeping and looked bad. Moreover, during lunch breaks, it became noticeable that he had stopped eating properly. Despite everything, the young man still cherished the hope of rebuilding his relationship with Morgan. On October 24, 2020, Morgan was visiting relatives in Columbus, Ohio. Jason sent her a short message asking how she got to her family. The girl was shocked, as she had told almost no one about this trip. She realized that Jason was still following her. When she asked him how he knew about her being in another city, there was no response. This brief dialogue was the last documented communication between our story's heroine and her stalker. On October 28, 2020, Morgan Ashley Fox was getting ready to go to work on the night shift. The groom escorted his beloved to the door, kissed her goodbye, and they parted. He went to bed, and she to her car. When the man woke up around 6 a.m. to get ready for work, he made himself coffee as usual and looked out the window. What he saw instantly alarmed him. Morgan's car was still in the driveway, and moreover, it was parked in such a way that it could not be fully seen. This seemed strange, as his fiancée's work shift had not yet ended. Troubled by what he saw, the guy decided to go outside and examine the car with his own eyes to find out what had happened. On the way, he grabbed his mobile phone and tried to call Morgan, but at the very moment he crossed the threshold and opened the front door, he heard the sound of her phone ringing. The fiancé ran to the car and saw a terrible sight. The driver's side door was open, and in the seat was his beloved, covered in blood and showing no signs of life. She did not respond to the calls of her mobile phone, which lay at her feet on the ground and was ringing incessantly. Stunned by what he saw, the frightened young man immediately called 911 emergency services.
911, you need police, fire, or medical help?
Police, medical. I'm pretty sure my girlfriend's dead. I got up for work, came out, looked outside, seen a car out here. I came out here and she's laying in her front seat. Oh my God.
You doing okay, sir?
No.
I understand. We're going to get you some help here as quick as possible.
A team of paramedics, along with the police, arrived at the scene in just a few minutes. They officially declared 29-year-old Morgan Ashley Fox dead, the cause of which left no doubt: 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Apparently, the victim had just managed to get behind the wheel when she was attacked. Her feet were still on the ground while her body was already in the car seat. Characteristic signs of rigor mortis had already appeared on the body, by which the time of death was determined quite accurately, around 2 in the morning. The girl died instantly and without suffering after the very first fatal shot to the head. Unfortunately, there were no video surveillance cameras installed in the area of the house where the couple lived. Also, no spent casings were found at the crime scene. Neither the neighbors nor the victim's fiancé heard any gunshots or noise from an unfamiliar vehicle. None of them noticed anything suspicious that night. Nevertheless, the investigators managed to find tire tracks on the asphalt that were obviously left in a hurry. It appears the attacker fired 2 shots, probably from a pistol equipped with a silencer, and then quickly disappeared from the crime scene in a car. This was clearly evidenced by the nature of the marks on the road surface. As the car drove away, pieces of rubber, earth, and mud were bursting out from under the wheels. However, despite this, none of the local residents heard anything suspicious. The deceased's fiancée and her friends told investigators about one intrusive young man who had been behaving strangely for a long time and was clearly very interested in Morgan. Of course, they were talking about Jason, her co-worker, with whom the girl's relationship had seriously deteriorated shortly before the tragedy. Many considered him the most likely suspect in Morgan's murder. The police decided to check his alibi and found out that he had arrived at his night shift at 2:57 a.m., where he stayed until about 10 a.m., after which he went home. Theoretically, the guy had the opportunity to commit the crime since his alibi was not confirmed at 2 in the morning, but the time frame was pretty narrow. Many people described Jason's strange relationship with Morgan, who, in her naivety, allowed him to get too close to her. People said that she allowed this man too much, recalling at least his behavior during the party at her house where he felt like the host. Ultimately, it all resulted in a clear violation of privacy and an intrusion into the girl's personal life, because of which she completely ceased communication with this colleague. Investigators were well aware of this model of behavior, and stalkers refusing to communicate often becomes a motive for them to attack. For police officers, the most intriguing information was the significant change in the young man's behavior after Morgan brushed him off. He began to behave carelessly and was clearly experiencing psychological problems. It was very strange that after Morgan's murder, he had stopped by the car wash after work and thoroughly washed his blue Ford from top to bottom, even though it was pouring rain outside and there was no reason to wash the car. It didn't really jibe with his recent carelessness about his appearance, about which his co-workers had expressed concern. They said he didn't care about his car or how he looked. Moreover, according to the testimony of co-workers, the car was clean and clearly not in need of maintenance. An examination of his vehicle yielded no results. Nothing was found inside. Of course, the investigators treated this information with suspicion. First of all, they checked the only available evidence, the tire tracks left in the mud in front of the victim's driveway. It seemed that the tread prints were identical to the tires of Jason's car. Moreover, such a tread pattern was quite rare. Undoubtedly, this automatically made him the prime suspect in the murder. In search of evidence, the police reviewed the recordings from all the surveillance cameras that could have captured the perpetrator's route. In the footage, they managed to spot a car similar to Jason's when it stopped at one of the intersections near Morgan's house. The recording was made at 1:35 a.m., after which the car headed towards the home of his future victim. It was captured on cameras a second time around 2:20 a.m., when it was returning the same way. When investigators learned about Jason's intrusive behavior, they decided to thoroughly examine his electronic devices. Thanks to this, the detectives were able to prove that the suspect was gathering information about the girl, secretly monitoring her activity on social networks. This allowed him to find out almost everything about her, where she lived, what her daily routine was, which made it possible to plan the attack in such a way as to remain unnoticed. To investigators' surprise, the suspect's cell phone did not signal in the area of the victim's home at the time of her murder. All this time, the device was at Jason's house. The guy explained this by saying that he had forgotten his mobile phone and worked the whole shift without it. For the same reason, he allegedly could not find out why the object of his obsession did not show up for work. However, this did not exclude the possibility that he deliberately left the phone at home to avoid tracking his whereabouts and divert suspicion from himself. The perpetrator turned out to be quite cunning and cautious, which seriously complicated the investigation. On November 1, Jason published a post on his social media page in memory of Morgan in which he wrote, "You were a bright light in my life and the lives of many other people. You were always there when I needed you. I would like to list everything about how you influenced my life, but the list would be so long that we would never reach the end. You were a friend. If I had a bad day, I knew that I could always come and talk to you." This post ended with the hashtag #JusticeForMorgan. 3 days after the crime, Jason went to the store with his friend Mickey. There, he continued to talk about Morgan, who was no longer among the living. From Jason's words, it followed that he had an intimate relationship with the deceased girl. And now these memories would remain the only recollection of her, which he intended to cherish for the rest of his life. 4 more days after the massacre, he again found himself in the company of his buddy Mickey. He asked about exactly how the video cameras that capture traffic on the roadways work. He was interested in whether they record continuously or only take short videos when sensors detect speeding, but he never got an answer to his question. During a meeting with the mother of the deceased at the funeral, Jason continued to surprise with his behavior. He told the woman a story about how he once gave her daughter a stuffed toy, and now he insistently asked to return this gift, claiming that it would be a good reminder of what a wonderful person Morgan was. The young man was so persistent that he almost broke into the mother of the victim's car, begging her to give him the toy. The woman even had to raise her voice to finally get him off her back with this request. Fortunately, the evidence gathered against Jason in the form of surveillance camera footage and tire tread marks were sufficient for his arrest. On November 4, 2020, he was detained on suspicion of committing the murder and later charged with premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances and stalking with threats. After his arrest, police scrutinized his hands. In the case of using a firearm, traces of gunpowder gases can remain on the skin for a long time, and they are not always washed off even during a shower. Therefore, there was a possibility that even a few days after the crime, these traces could still be detected. Forensic experts conducted a thorough analysis, but no powder residue was found on Jason's body. His clothing, which he was wearing on the night of the attack, was also checked, but no traces of gunpowder gases were found on it either. This fact was actively used by the suspect's lawyer, trying to prove the absence of direct evidence and the clear contradiction of the facts with the version of the investigation. On April 2, 2021, the trial in this case was held. In court, several witnesses from both the victims and Jason's inner circle considered the murder charge to be erroneous. The defense argued that the police relied only on indirect evidence, while there was no direct evidence of the young man's involvement in the girl's death. Many friends and relatives described him as a calm and non-aggressive person. Despite his obvious obsession with his colleague, none of them could believe that Jason was capable of such a thing. And indeed, the prosecution's arguments were based solely on indirect evidence. But all the circumstantial evidence pointed specifically to Jason. Detectives have discarded the robbery or sexual assault leads. Firstly, the victim was not missing anything, including valuables in the car and her purse. Secondly, no signs of sexual violence were found either. It was a quiet, peaceful area where no gangs operated, so Morgan could hardly have become an accidental victim of some criminal showdown. The nature of the tire tread marks found at the crime scene matched those of the defendant's car. Moreover, the attacker clearly tried to make it so that his car remained unnoticed by the victim. He could have lurked in ambush, waiting for the right moment. According to the prosecutors, the defendant wanted Morgan not to see his vehicle until it was too late, and she did not have time to call for help. One of the key questions in the case was the murder weapon, which was never found. It was known that Jason owned a firearm. He had a Ruger .22 caliber revolver, which law enforcement seized for inspection. The victim was shot with a similar weapon, but after a ballistic examination, it became clear that this particular revolver was not the instrument of the crime. The investigation never managed to find the very pistol from which the fatal shots were fired. However, this did not exclude the possibility that Jason could have illegally purchased another pistol with a silencer, killed the girl, and then disposed of the weapon. In addition, the prosecution focused on the suspect's strange behavior, in particular on the fact that he thoroughly washed his car, probably immediately after the attack, and this despite the fact that it was raining outside. The young man tried to explain his actions by the presence of mental problems and symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, the experts did not confirm that he had any such disorders. Anyway, taken together, these facts looked extremely suspicious. When the defendant was asked why he was in the area of the victim's home shortly before her murder, he denied the very fact of his presence there. However, there was no exact geolocation data to confirm the police's words, since his phone remained at home and the GPS module in the car was turned off. The only evidence that he was there was the recordings from the surveillance cameras, but the defense argued that the footage simply captured a similar car, because due to the poor quality of the night shooting, it was impossible to see the license plates. As for washing the car, Jason additionally explained this by saying that he was allegedly going to go to his mother to give her a birthday present, so he decided to wash the car beforehand. However, as it turned out, the holiday itself took place back in June, 4 months before that, so on the part of the son, it looked like an obvious delay. Naturally, the court regarded his words as untrue. Numerous witnesses at the trial spoke about the defendant's obsessive behavior towards Morgan. He clearly tried to cross boundaries and pretend to be a much closer person than he actually was. The girl did not take his behavior seriously, which allowed him to get so close to her and even cherish illusions about a possible shared future. Jason did indeed manage to become a close friend of Morgan's, right up until he violated her privacy by looking at the explicit photos. This happened just 20 days before the massacre, after which the young man desperately tried to restore their communication, but all his efforts were in vain. It was probably this that pushed him to such radical actions. After all, he was the only one with a real motive for murder. On the night of the murder, colleagues noticed striking changes in Jason's behavior at work. He looked much more cheerful than in previous days. When asked what had happened, the guy said that Morgan had supposedly resumed communication with him and even added him as a friend on social media, so he hoped that she had given him another chance. However, employees doubted the truthfulness of his words because before that, they had communicated with Morgan and knew about her unwavering position regarding Jason. That same night, Jason showed his colleagues a photograph in which he and Morgan were pictured together in the office. He considered this picture a wonderful, friendly gift. At the same time, the guy himself expressed concern that the girl did not show up for work. To all the questions of his colleagues, he answered that he had no idea where Morgan could be since he had left his mobile phone at home. Later, when everyone learned about the girl's death, his actions began to seem even stranger. Jason's behavior changed again. He became more agitated and repeatedly expressed concern that GPS data from his car could be the reason for being held liable. He confessed to his colleagues that he was passing through the area where Morgan lived on his way to work on the night shift, but then changed his story and began to claim that the GPS device in his car could have been hacked and someone was trying to frame him. Then, Jason told his coworkers that the day after the murder, his car was allegedly stolen but quickly returned. Later, detectives found out that Jason had created a fake social media page, which he used to spread a fictional story about his intimate relationship with Morgan. He described in detail what allegedly happened between them, and even used explicit photos of the girl from her phone as confirmation of his words. This activity began back in June 2020, and according to the prosecution, could have been an attempt to create an alibi. In these conversations, the suspect told several women the same story on behalf of Morgan, the same one that he retold to his friend Mickey while walking around the store. It seems he was trying to spread information about intimacy with the victim, probably to divert suspicion from himself. Bullets matching the gun used to shoot Morgan were indeed found in Jason's home. However, he claimed that he kept this ammunition for his father's revolver, which was given to him as a means of self-defense. Due to the absence of casings at the crime scene, the ballistic examination could not definitively establish from which weapon the shots were fired. At the same time, such a number of coincidences looked extremely suspicious and became another indirect piece of evidence of the young man's guilt. Jason's close friend came to his defense. According to his buddy, the defendant never showed aggression or anger towards Morgan. Although he was obsessed with the girl, he would never harm her. According to the friend, Jason was extremely upset that Morgan had blocked him on social media and refused to communicate. He was very worried about this, lost his appetite and sleep. But according to the confession of a close friend, Jason blamed only himself for everything and understood that he had done wrong. He did not feel rage towards the girl and was not going to take revenge on her, so he clearly could not be the perpetrator of this murder. The defendant himself insisted that under no circumstances could he have done this to Morgan. He admitted that he had the most tender feelings for her and was ready to let her go if it was impossible to build a relationship. The lawyers emphasized the fact that Morgan Fox was an attractive girl and had many admirers. In their opinion, from the very beginning of the investigation, the police focused only on Jason and actually did not consider other possible suspects. They say the goal of the detectives was to prove Jason's guilt and not to find the real culprit. However, despite the persuasiveness of the defense's arguments, the prosecution insisted that it had done all the necessary work, during which no other obsessed admirers of Morgan were identified except for Jason. The deceased's fiancée also underwent a thorough check. No traces of gunpowder gases were found on his hands, which were examined immediately after the tragedy. There were no bloodstains on his clothes, and he successfully passed a polygraph test. According to the prosecution, Jason was a skilled manipulator who had been hiding behind the mask of a treacherous friend for years. The defendant turned out to be a pathological liar who managed to deceive everyone around him, but everything secret became apparent when he lost control of his feelings for the victim. Then it became clear that in reality, he was a self-centered and extremely jealous type. And after the phone incident, the girl decided to completely sever all ties with him. Jason harbored a grudge and decided to take revenge. He simply could not come to terms with the fact that Morgan would be with someone else. This idea was also confirmed by the behavior of the defendant himself. He clearly harbored illusions about the relationship with the victim and was wishful thinking. Despite all the efforts of the investigation, the young man turned out to be surprisingly well prepared. Throughout the entire investigation, forensic experts never managed to find the murder weapon, bullet casings, any fingerprints, DNA traces, or personal belongings that Jason could have left at the crime scene. He even managed to skillfully hide his exact whereabouts, despite the fact that modern technology is literally packed with tracking tools. All this put the prosecution in an extremely disadvantageous position. They had to convince the jury and prove the suspect's guilt, relying only on indirect evidence and assumptions. The only physical evidence that was obtained was the tread marks identical to those on the wheels of the defendant's car. The prosecution tried to prove that a typical stalker appeared before the jury who acted exactly as people of his type usually do in such situations. He really pursued Morgan, which was confirmed by numerous correspondences and the testimony of colleagues. That's the question. Could he really have gone so far as to kill someone he loved so much? On April 22, 2021, the jury retired to the deliberation room to discuss the verdict. The court found Jason guilty of aggravated murder as well as harassment. Jason McDermott was sentenced to 180 days in prison for stalking in addition to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason McDermott has never admitted his guilt. Jason's lawyer insisted on a review of the verdict, but all appeals were rejected by the court. A woman's life was tragically cut short, revealing a chilling secret that gripped the entire community. The story began with a seemingly ordinary evening, but what followed was a nightmare. The victim, a bright and ambitious student, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only unanswered questions. The search for answers led to a disturbing discovery that shook the police to the core. With each new discovery, the horrifying truth about the victim's fate became more gruesome. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that the crime was not just a random act of violence, but a deliberate and calculated attack. Taylor Beal, a high school graduate from the small town of Vienna in the state of Virginia, USA, decided to enter Virginia Commonwealth University, This educational institution, located in the state capital of Richmond, was famous for its first-class infrastructure and vibrant nightlife that revolved around the student body. The university, known for its achievements in the field of biotechnology, had about 20,000 students. For Taylor, the university's location was ideal, as it allowed her not to move too far away from her caring mother. Initially, the girl often traveled between the two cities, living for some time in Richmond with close friends of her parents. But later, she decided to settle directly on the university campus. On September 5, 2005, Taylor Bale intended to visit one of the local restaurants to have dinner with her friend Ben. Afterwards, the student planned to skateboard with him through the streets of the city at night and then return to campus. Around 10 in the evening, after meeting her friend, the girl came to the dormitory. However, her roommate was spending time with her boyfriend and asked Taylor not to disturb them. The girl agreed to leave, taking only her car keys, cell phone, and $40 in cash. Her purse was left in the room. Before leaving, the heroine told her roommate that she would return in a couple of hours. Taylor did not show up at the dorm, neither at the appointed time nor the next day. The girl stopped communicating with her loved ones, did not respond on social networks, and behaved rather strangely for her. All messages sent via Messenger remained unanswered, and attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. On September 7, 2005, the girl's mother went to the police with a statement about her daughter's disappearance. The police assumed that the adult girl had simply left and would soon return on her own, so they were not particularly enthusiastic about it. After all, students disappear almost daily, but in 99% of cases, the young people return. Usually, the boys and girls disappear for a few days or longer, hanging out at parties with their friends. A week later, Taylor had still not shown up. The police never launched a full-scale search. The missing girl's family pressured the police to bring in more investigators to search for her. When they checked on Taylor's use of her phone and social media accounts, they found that the girl had completely stopped communicating. This convinced authorities that Taylor was in a terrible situation and that the family was telling the truth. In addition, all of the girl's belongings, clothes, makeup, cash, and wallet, were left in her dorm room. Taylor was never left without these items for an extended period of time. In addition, no transfers or payments were recorded on her bank cards, which finally convinced the detectives of the seriousness of the situation. The police turned to the public for help through the media, but unfortunately, this did not yield any results. Soon, Taylor's car was found, a white 1997 Ford. It was parked just a few kilometers from the university campus. Law enforcement decided to put the car under surveillance for at least 12 hours, hoping that the likely criminal would return to it. Unfortunately, this did not happen, so the car was sent for examination. No one suspected that her disappearance would become a real nightmare for the police, and especially for her loved ones at the initial stage. The first alarming clue of the investigation that the detectives came across was that license plates stolen 2 months before the girl's disappearance were installed on Taylor's car. This suggested the involvement of a quick-witted and knowledgeable criminal in the case. As it became known, the numbers were registered in the state of Ohio. Investigators found that they belonged to a former resident of that state who had recently moved to Richmond. The owner of the numbers turned out to be a student who had previously reported their theft to the police. His words were confirmed, so suspicions were removed from him. Experts from various fields were involved in the inspection of Taylor's vehicle. However, despite a thorough examination, this did not yield any results. Analyzing the missing girl's social circle, investigators immediately drew attention to a 38-year-old amateur photographer named Ben Folly, with whom Taylor was friends and met shortly before her disappearance. The man had no alibi for that evening. His testimony was confused and contradictory. He could not clearly explain where exactly he spent the night after Taylor's disappearance. Ben's apartment was of particular interest to detectives. They obtained search warrants for his home, as well as the room on campus that the missing girl shared with her roommate. The man was immediately put on the list of suspects, as after interrogation, investigators came to the conclusion that there was an intimate relationship between him and Taylor, and that he was clearly hiding something. When checking Ben's computer, shocking facts were discovered. It turned out that the man owned several websites where he posted certain content. On one of these resources, he published photos of naked and semi-naked girls, and all of them were much younger than him. Some of them were minors. There were even photos of very young children aged 3 or 4 years old. The missing girl also posed for Ben. Taylor's mother was convinced that the photographer was illegally using her daughter's photos. In addition to these questionable activities, Ben had a criminal past related to stalking and domestic violence. Immediately after the start of the investigation, it was noticed that the man began to hastily delete his sites, probably trying to hide something from the police. He even sent a message to his subscribers about the need for urgent cleaning. Studying the girl's digital footprint on the internet, the police paid attention to her profile on the suspect's website. Here, Taylor appeared completely different than in real life. Instead of a self-confident, sociable, and active girl, she seemed a frightened and withdrawn person. Judging by the restrained description in the profile, she was looking for new acquaintances in Richmond since she had recently moved and did not know many people in the city yet. Investigators managed to find out that Taylor last logged into this site on September 4, 2005, less than a day before her disappearance. That day, the girl actively corresponded with several friends. Basically, these were light, easy conversations with jokes. Already, after Taylor disappeared and people began to worry about her, a huge number of messages with words of love and support were sent to her address. Numerous friends of the girl by correspondence sincerely wished that she would return home as soon as possible, safe and sound. Police uncovered the main suspect's dark secrets step by step, and there turned out to be quite a few of them. Having analyzed the history of correspondence over the past few months, the detectives concluded that most of Taylor's online communication consisted of dialogues with Ben. As it turned out, very frank conversations took place between them, from which it followed that the couple had an intimate relationship once, and this happened even before the girl moved to the campus in Richmond. The missing girl's friend reported that after intimacy with Ben, Taylor no longer wanted to maintain an intimate relationship with him, but continued to communicate as a friend. The relationship between Ben and Taylor also included shooting explicit photos. Even before moving to Richmond, the girl repeatedly met with Ben. They chose unusual locations, for example, abandoned old buildings. Of course, this is not the best place for dates, but Ben insisted on such conditions for creating explicit shots. He believed that the gloomy atmosphere was ideal for the embodiment of his ideas, and he considered his work as works of art. In many messages, the name of the couple's favorite place was mentioned: Belila, located on the James River in the very heart of the city. Analyzing the correspondence, the investigators concluded that Taylor herself, despite her young age, took the initiative in the relationship with Ben. At the same time, the police suggested that an adult man still had some influence on the girl because the age difference was a whole 20 years. Taylor herself, in her messages, called this difference life experience and did not see anything wrong with it. An important role in the investigation was played by Taylor's personal diaries, which the detectives managed to find. These records reflected the typical experiences of a teenager who had already left childhood but had not yet reached full maturity. There were also doubts, fears, worries, and thoughts in the notes that the girl could not share with anyone. Taylor, being a student, did not suspect that Ben was publishing candid photos in which she posed. The girl sincerely believed that they were engaged in creativity exclusively for themselves and strangers would not see these pictures. The police learned that Taylor dated different men, preferring those who were older than her. Her idol was actor Johnny Depp, whose features she subconsciously looked for in every adult. Many believed that Ben outwardly resembled a celebrity. Perhaps this is what attracted the girl to him. Detectives continued to question her inner circle. Parents told investigators the story of their daughter's life. For some time, the family lived in Great Britain and Belgium, often moving from place to place, since the girl's mother was married to an officer in the Royal Air Force. After the breakup of this marriage, the mother and daughter were able to return to their native Virginia. The woman married several more times, but these attempts were also unsuccessful. Taylor was a very energetic girl with a docile character, very smart sometimes, even too much for her age. These character traits helped her quickly adapt to new schools. In total, young Taylor changed about 15 educational institutions before receiving a certificate and entering university. She easily made friends and acquaintances. Sometimes the girl seemed too soft and trusting. For a long time, the mother tried to protect her daughter, believing that she was not yet ready for an independent adult life. The biography of the missing girl turned out to be full of ambiguous facts and secrets. The mother described Taylor as a strong-willed and energetic girl. She grew up in a privileged environment surrounded by conservative and wealthy people. However, Taylor wanted to know the other side of life, so after entering university, she decided to move to another city and live on campus to achieve her goals on her own. Unfortunately, the young student did not even suspect what dangers could lurk behind the walls of a student dormitory. Despite good intentions, such places also have a dark side. Sometimes they turn into a real breeding ground for undesirable phenomena: theft, drug addiction, promiscuity. Since students are in close contact with each other, all this begins to manifest itself more clearly. Focused on studying and getting an education, without a wealth of life experience, it is very difficult to objectively assess the situation, which is what happened to Taylor. In the opinion of law enforcement officers, the missing girl made several serious mistakes at once. First of all, this concerns the relationship with a man who was twice her age, had convictions, and mental health problems. A former girlfriend and a former roommate confirmed that Ben suffered from bipolar disorder, had sharp mood swings, and problems with anger control. The mother of the missing girl suggested that the attack on Taylor could have been committed by several attackers. However, the most suspicious figure in this story remained 38-year-old Ben Folly, and detectives continued to closely investigate his identity. The man led a very active life online. Ben Folly owned several websites on various topics and revealed a lot of information about himself. Ben's subscribers even knew his shoe size, but compared to some of his thematic resources, this data seemed like a trifle. One of the most creepy sites turned out to be where the man published his distorted vision of beauty. He considered it creativity, but to detectives, it seemed evidence of serious mental problems. On this resource, Ben combined images of naked bodies of models much younger than him with images of death, decaying flesh, and gothic motifs. He often used real animal bones and skulls in his work. As it turned out, Ben managed to intrigue the 17-year-old student with his gloomy creativity. This is where their relationship began. It has become known that Taylor was experiencing loneliness before she went missing. In her notes, the girl admitted that she missed her friends who lived in another city. She had companions and close friends, and in Richmond, she hadn't made enough friends yet. That was most likely why she was socializing with the oddball Ben. Of course, a fascination with creepy pictures didn't automatically turn a person into a kidnapper or murderer, but combined with other details of this man's past, it raised increasingly disturbing questions. Studying Ben's online activity, police noticed that he displayed two completely different personalities. On the one hand, he appeared as a kind, loving, vulnerable, and creative person. On the other hand, numerous ex-girlfriends who posed for his photographs complained about him. Several former partners claimed that Ben was jealous, cruel, aggressive, and dangerous. Some girls even became victims of physical violence at his hands. Although these episodes were too insignificant to report to the police, they simply broke off relations with the man after the first manifestations of aggression. Suspicions about Ben Folly grew, but direct evidence was still lacking. Suddenly, on September 23, 2005, a new post appeared on Taylor's social media page at 11:24 a.m. A message was published in which the girl claimed that she was fine and would soon return to her family. She mentioned some problems that needed to be urgently resolved but did not go into details. Taylor's page gained considerable popularity after her disappearance and was under the close attention of many people. Therefore, the news of this post instantly spread around the city. However, the police considered the post an attempt at staging, as no one had yet managed to contact Taylor. Law enforcement officers did not believe that this message was written by the girl herself. On the same day that the new post appeared, the main suspect, Ben Folly, was arrested on charges of creating and storing pornographic materials involving minors. But the man insisted that none of the photographs found in his apartment belonged to him. According to him, These pictures were left by the previous tenant of the dwelling. At this stage of the investigation, the police had not yet accused Ben of involvement in Taylor's disappearance, since he wasn't the only suspect in the case. Given the amount of time that had passed, it was highly unlikely that the girl was still alive. But so far, the detectives had no solid evidence against Folly. In any case, the obscene photos trial gave the detectives extra time to work while Ben Folly was incarcerated. Meanwhile, the police came across a strange post by Ben published on September 8. According to his story, he was attacked that evening. The man even had to file a report about this with the police. In one of his blogs, he described this incident in detail. According to Ben, 3 or 4 attackers attacked him. They put a black bag over his head so he couldn't see their faces. Folly got away without serious injuries, but the attackers threw him out of the car somewhere on the outskirts of the city in the morning. They stole $20 from him, a camera, and a tripod. The man had to walk to the city for a long time. However, during searches in his house, investigators found several expensive tripods and professional filming equipment. Such a variety of equipment looked suspicious because, officially, Ben did not work anywhere and lived on disability benefits due to bipolar disorder. The main suspect definitely could not afford such expensive purchases while receiving only state payments. Investigators stepped up their efforts to gather as much evidence as possible. During a search of Folly's home, they managed to find several boxes of provocative items ranging from edged weapons like a huge machete to masochistic paraphernalia. Of course, the man claimed it was all props for photo shoots. In addition, the machete allegedly helped him wade through dense thickets on his way to abandoned buildings and chop wood for the fire. In addition, a suspicious stain resembling blood was found in Ben's house. Samples were sent for analysis. During searches of the area around Foley's house, several strange items were found in a dumpster, including a necklace and a watch. Clearly not the kind of accessories that people usually just get rid of. After the publication in the media of information about the seized items, suspicions about the amateur photographer with eccentric artistic views only intensified. In fact, the police had at least one more suspect named Jesse Schultz, whom they also thoroughly checked. It turned out that Jesse was a 22-year-old student, and his trail was managed to be found with the help of service dogs. When Taylor's car was found, specially trained dogs were used to search for the alleged criminal's scent traces. In the end, the scent trail led to the house where this young man lived. According to Jesse's admission, he started dating Taylor in August. It was during this period, almost immediately after the girl moved to Richmond, that alarming entries appeared in her diaries. The Schultz family turned out to be the same friends of Taylor's father with whom she lived in the first days after arriving in the city. Taylor immediately began to complain about the son of the Schultz couple. According to the girl, the young man was so intrusive in his courtship of her that she no longer felt safe under their roof. This is what caused her to move to the university campus. However, Taylor did not mention that they were dating. After the service dogs picked up the trail that led to Jesse, law enforcement officers conducted thorough searches in his home. Traces of narcotic substances were found in the guy's room, which gave grounds for his detention. However, no concrete evidence of Jesse's involvement in Taylor's disappearance was found. In addition, he had a reliable alibi, so his name was soon crossed off the list of suspects. On October 5, 2005, investigators spoke with one of the missing girl's friends named Kevin. Despite the fact that they only met 4 times in total, this was enough for Kevin to get the impression of Taylor as an extremely trusting person. In addition, in his opinion, the girl was quite pliable and easily influenced by others. The last time he saw Taylor was the day before she disappeared. At that time, the girl seemed very inspired and excited. On the eve of her 18th birthday, she confessed to Kevin that she was going to do something risky, but did not specify what she meant. The guy suggested that it was about some kind of photo shoot. In particular, it was during that meeting that he first saw Ben Folly, whom Taylor introduced as her photographer friend. Kevin immediately felt hostility towards this man because he made a very suspicious impression on him. Later, Ben himself contacted Kevin, trying to find Taylor because he could not do it on his own. The guy had a clear feeling that the photographer was hiding something. Throughout October, the search for the missing girl continued. Police officers examined numerous locations in the vicinity of Richmond. These were placing that Ben photographed as part of his project dedicated to highlighting the city's problems. The attention of law enforcement officers was attracted by one of the locations that the man had been excessively interested in recently. About 100 kilometers from Richmond in Matthews County, it was decided to make a thorough search of the outbuildings there, which brought results. The body of a dead young girl was found behind one of the barns on private property. Fragments of duct tape were found on the remains of the body, suggesting that the girl was held tied up. It was impossible to identify her on the spot due to significant damage. The body was in terrible condition. The soft tissues had significantly decomposed due to environmental influences and the activity of small animals like wild dogs. Identification of the deceased's identity became possible only thanks to the recognition of fragments of clothing by her mother. In the end, the examination finally confirmed that the found remains belonged to the missing Taylor Beal. Experts found that soil particles from the tires of Taylor's car were identical to soil samples taken near the barn. This indicated that the criminal had transported the body in the girl's car and then drove the car to another location. Most likely, Taylor was attacked almost immediately after she left the campus. Police turned to Ben Folly for comment. He claimed that the abduction was planned and carried out by his ex-girlfriend with the participation of several beefy young men. He himself was allegedly under the influence of drugs, did not directly participate in this madness, and does not remember anything. However, this testimony sounded extremely unconvincing. After the discovery of the body, all the attention of the local community was riveted to the eccentric amateur photographer. The fact is that Taylor's remains were found near Chesapeake Bay, in an area that had repeatedly appeared in Ben's photographs. This indicated that for the man, this location had a special, perhaps even sacred meaning. The version of a random coincidence was immediately rejected because Foley was the last to see the girl alive on that fatal evening. In addition, he was previously noticed in such strange activities as collecting car license plates. Horrific details from Ben's past also surfaced, including an incident where he attacked his ex-girlfriend with such fury that she barely escaped. The defendant even inflicted bodily injuries on himself. The conflict reached such a serious scale that the girl miraculously saved was forced to take a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend. An internet investigation revealed a whole series of similar cases of Ben's inappropriate behavior towards his partners. Gradually, the level of aggression in his actions only increased. All these facts formed, in the eyes of detectives, the image of a mentally unstable man with deviant tendencies who lured young, trusting girls into his networks. On January 17, 2006, Ben Folly was officially charged with the abduction, rape, and willful murder of Taylor Beal. Unfortunately, due to the extremely poor preservation of the body, forensic experts were never able to accurately determine all the circumstances of the girl's death. This led to the fact that, already in February, serious amendments had to be made to the initial charges. At that time, the suspect was already serving a sentence for storing pornographic materials depicting minors. In the end, in August, Ben made a deal with the investigation and pleaded guilty to the crimes he was charged with, albeit very selectively choosing the wording. According to his version of events, that evening he met with Taylor immediately after she left the campus. Together, they went to a deserted place where, in the backseat of the car, Ben allegedly tied the girl's hands behind her back with duct tape, after which they had rough, consensual sex. Then, in a fit of passion, the man allegedly accidentally strangled his partner. He left the body in the forest, and the next day, he returned to hide the remains. Most of the facts cited by Ben remained unsubstantiated allegations that are difficult to prove. Although the forensic expert was unable to unequivocally determine the cause of Taylor's death, he insisted on its violent nature. After all, even with accidental strangulation, it takes effort for several minutes for a lethal result to occur, so the attacker could have released the victim at any time. The prosecution insisted that Ben deliberately tied the girl's wrists not for sexual games, but to deprive her of the opportunity to resist. And this meant that the whole story he voiced was a complete lie and the events unfolded in a completely different way. Folly stood his ground, assuring that the duct tape was part of a role-playing game. However, no one believed this version. Taylor's friends stated that she was never interested in extreme sexual practices such as asphyxia or bondage. While recreating the picture of events described by the accused, the investigators came to an unambiguous conclusion that the scenario he voiced does not stand up to any criticism. In the cramped space of a car, and even with her hands tied behind her back, the girl would be in an extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable position. Taking into account Taylor's character and habits, it is unlikely that she would voluntarily agree to this. A much more plausible version looked like Ben kidnapped, raped, and then killed his victim. The main motive for the crime was considered the girl's refusal to have an intimate relationship with Folly. In February 2006, the hapless photographer was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Today we will look at a tragic story that will shock you, so watch this video until the end. In a quiet town, a sudden and chilling crime shatters the peace, causing a series of shocking revelations. What began as an ordinary day quickly degenerates into a nightmare. A story of kidnapping and murder that attracts attention from all sides. A man trusted by many becomes the center of a nightmarish investigation that will uncover dark secrets and spark deep legal debates. As the investigation unfolds, it becomes clear that this was no random act, but a meticulously planned crime. Fear and disbelief grip the community as dark secrets emerge, painting a picture of the perpetrator's twisted mind. The horrors that came to light were not only shocking, but deeply disturbing. The case takes an even darker turn when a heartbreaking confession is made that shocks even the most seasoned investigators. Amidst this chaos, a brave man emerged whose courage and quick thinking played a decisive role in revealing the truth. This story begins in Bend, an attractive city in Oregon located on the Deschutes River. Kaylee Sawyer lived in the same house with her boyfriend Cameron. Kaylee worked as a dental assistant and was also busy with her studies at Central Oregon Community College. She was artistic and loved to write poetry, draw, and take pictures. She loved wakeboarding, skiing, golf, fishing, and many other outdoor sports. The city of Bend, where Kaylee lived, offered photographers many stunning landscapes to capture on camera. It was the perfect place for Kaylee to live. She was close to both of her parents, who remarried after divorcing when she was young. Her 4 brothers were also close to her. Friends and family considered her one of the happiest people they knew. She was kind, loving, often smiling, and a joy to be around. When she went for walks, she often interacted with other people on the street. Even though they were strangers, everyone was a friend to Kaylee, her mother noted. On July 23, 2016, Kaylee was heading to a friend's bachelorette party. After packing her things, she left her house to meet everyone near her college campus in downtown Bend. After she parked her car at her friend's house, they all headed to the party. Kaylee and her friends spent the next few hours going from pub to bar. Everyone was having a great time celebrating, dancing, singing, playing games, and enjoying the drinks. The evening was so fun that at one point, Kaylee started dancing in a pub with a stranger. Cameron, her boyfriend, received a text from one of his friends who accidentally spotted her in a pub dancing with a stranger. The party was coming to an end on July 24. After a late night of drinking, Kaylee called her boyfriend Cameron to ask for a ride home. Kaylee also texted Cameron's friend to apologize for what he might have thought was an inappropriate dance with another man. Cameron arrived, grabbed Kaylee, and put her in his car. An argument immediately ensued, which continued all the way home. As the argument got even more heated, Cameron says he got out of the car when they parked outside their apartment building. Kaylee was left alone, crying and saying she needed some time to get over it. 10 minutes later, Cameron went back outside to try to talk her into going home, since it was too late to argue and if they just went to bed, everything would be fine the next day. But when he got to the car, he realized that the passenger door was wide open and she was not inside. Cameron looked around and Kaylee Sawyer was nowhere to be seen. Cameron started looking for Kaylee and sent her several texts. "Where are you, Kaylee? Please, just come home to be with me. I don't want to play this game." Kaylee responded by saying, "My phone is about to die." Cameron wrote, "Please don't do this to me. I'm sorry that I was upset and shouted when I picked you up." Kelly replied, "Are you kidding? Because it's not an apology." She then turned off her phone and stopped responding. Cameron went to a friend's house, hoping that Kaylee had walked there, but she wasn't there. Cameron drove around the streets, trying to find her, but to no avail. Cameron called Kelly's mother, Julie, but she said she hadn't seen her daughter. Cameron called her friends, but they didn't know where she was either. Much time passed, but Kaylee didn't answer calls or texts. There was still hope that she had gone to someone's house to cool off, but that seemed less and less likely as time went on. Cameron called the police in desperation.
Hi. I'm not sure if this is quite the right number to call. Last night I got home from the bars with my girlfriend. She got upset at me and ran off. And I chased her and wasn't able to find her, and I still haven't heard from her. Her phone's off. I called all her family and they haven't heard from her, so I'm wondering what you recommend I do.
We can put in a call and we can have officers and deputies look for her.
Okay.
Where was she last seen at?
College Way.
In that apartment complex?
Yes.
In a specific apartment or?
In the parking lot. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, she was mad at me, so I walked inside and told her to come meet me in there when she's like, calm down. And then I went back out in 10 minutes and she was gone. And I called her a few times and she said she was walking down the street. And then I guess she said her phone was about to die. And then I couldn't get a hold of her after that. I haven't heard from her since.
Okay. She took off on foot?
Yes.
What's her last name?
Sawyer.
First name?
Kaylee. Kaylee.
And she's got her phone with her?
She did last I saw her, but it's been dead all day, and
What's the phone
I
number?
imagine she would charge it.
Do you know what carrier it is?
It is Verizon. She has a vehicle. It's parked at her friend's house, and I've been over there and talked to her friend, and she hasn't heard from her either.
And the vehicle's still there?
Yep.
Any idea where she would go, or?
I don't know. I figured she'd go where her car was, her best friend's or her mom's, and I've been over to both. Talked to her dad, and I just haven't heard anything from anybody knowing this.
Okay. All right, we'll have an officer get in contact with you. If she gets in contact with you, they'll give us a call back.
Okay, will
All right.
do.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
When news broke that Kaylee was missing, her name started appearing on social media and hundreds of volunteers came out to look for her. After questioning her boyfriend Cameron, he was quickly ruled out by police because they had no reason to doubt him or what he said. They also questioned her friends, who she had been out with that evening. They told police they had seen her with a stranger. The man she had been seen dancing with in the pub caught their attention, and they thought it would lead to a lead. But he was also shocked by her disappearance. He had only danced with her for a few minutes before she joined her group of friends, and then she left. He never saw her again after that. She was last seen early Sunday morning near the parking lot of her West Bend apartment, walking toward nearby Central Oregon Community College. Her mother says her daughter is very close to her family, and it's very unusual for them to not hear from her for 2 days. The mother says they are extremely worried and just want their Kaylee back. Missing 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer has much of Central Oregon on edge. Thousands of concerned residents spent the day posting flyers and sharing their concerns on Facebook. Everybody was definitely concerned, but Kaylee's mother, Julie, was far more than that. She said the second she heard her daughter was missing and not replying to anyone, she felt a shift in her whole body, and something was telling her that Kaylee was no longer alive. Officers started trying to find the location of her phone. Her phone was pinging all over the city of Bend, but sadly, this was confirmed to be an old iPhone that was still registered under Kaylee's Apple ID. It was now Monday morning, and Kaylee hadn't shown up to her shift at the dental clinic. Police knew they had to pick up the pace, and Kaylee entered law enforcement databases as an endangered missing person. Out of the blue, a woman came to the police station, claiming to have information that would shock them. She told them that her husband had been acting very strange for the past couple of days and had been telling her incredibly disturbing and shocking things. Her husband was 31-year-old Edwin Lara, and Isabel said that his strange behavior had been noticeable since he came home very late on Sunday after finishing his shift. He often worked late as a security guard on a college campus.
Works a graveyard like he did on Saturday night. He starts at like 3 p.m. What time? Like, does he work like a 12-hour shift or?
It's always changing.
It's always changing.
It's always unpredictable. So I actually was on the point that I didn't even know when he was going to be working or not.
So what time is church on Sunday?
9 in the morning.
Okay. Are you noticing anything weird at all at this point?
So he was very quiet, like on the way to church. Wasn't saying much. It was just unusual. At church, he was just very quiet, very withdrawn. Like, he would usually, like, grab my hand or something. He wasn't doing it. So when we get out of church, I asked him, "What's wrong with you? What's going on?" And I told him, you know, we've been together for a very long time. I know something's up. He comes out of the room, and his eyes were all teary. That's why I'm like, "What happened? Tell me what happened. What's wrong?" So he sits on the sofa. I turn off the TV, and then he just says that. He's like, I kill a woman, that's what he said.
Officers went straight to the home where they found exactly what Isabel said they would. Kaylee's purse and ID, her shoes, a blood-stained rock, and a clump of what looked like it could be Kaylee's hair. What they found pointed to far more than accidentally hitting her with his car and panicking. Everything was pointing towards this being a violent homicide. By this point, however, Edwin was already on the run, embarking on what would become an interstate crime spree. After leaving his car at his parents' house, he spotted a 19-year-old called Andrea sitting in her car in a parking lot. She had just clocked off a 12-hour shift and was about to head home when Edwin opened the passenger side door, pointed a gun at her, and demanded she start driving. As she drove, he showed her pictures of him in his campus security uniform and spoke to her about the news reports talking about Kaylee. After 3 hours on the road, Edwin wanted to stop at a motel for the night. As he checked in, he made Andrea pretend to be his girlfriend. Once inside the room, he handcuffed her to the bathroom door while he showered. He then ordered her to take a shower in front of him. Andrea was fighting against him every step of the way and point blank refused. After this, he handcuffed her to the bed and told her to take sleeping pills. At this very moment, the alarm on her phone went off. Thinking on her feet, Andrea lied, telling Edwin she had an STD, and the alarm was to remind her to take her medication. She hoped this would stop him from sexually assaulting her, and fortunately, her plan worked. Edwin, who was becoming more paranoid by the minute, then decided to leave the motel at 1:30 in the morning. The pair carried on driving until 5 a.m. before stopping at another motel. He walked over to a 73-year-old man near his vehicle and tried to take it before shooting him in the stomach. He didn't get the car, but fortunately, the man survived. Edwin then fled with Andrea on foot to a nearby gas station where he carjacked a 76-year-old woman. The woman and her 2 young grandsons were inside the car. He forced one of the teens to drive the car at gunpoint before letting them go and continuing with the vehicle. Thankfully, the family was unharmed. Edwin ordered Andrea to start driving to California, where he had family. During the drive, Edwin used Andrea's phone to record a video of himself.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say that I apologize for everything I've done. Most likely, I'm going to get caught. And sorry about that girl in Central Oregon. And I also want to let family members, Andrea, that she's fine and she will be fine since so far she's been doing what I've been told to do. I used to kill that other girl, you know, and I regret it. I regret killing her. You know, she kept screaming and I was telling her forever.
He made her post it to Facebook, titling it "Murderer on the Loose." Edwin called his family to tell them what was going on, and at 6:40 a.m., he called 911, telling them who he was and what he was wanted for. A California Highway Patrol officer saw the car speeding on the interstate and tried to pull it over. The chase reached more than 100 miles per hour before Edwin was eventually pulled over. Before he was arrested, he recorded himself saying, "You know, I know this is being recorded, and I just want to say to the family of Kaylee that, you know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did, and in time, I will tell them where the body is." He then handed the phone over to Andrea, and the police placed him in handcuffs. 19-year-old Andrea was also arrested, but when they realized that she too was another innocent victim, she was released. When Edwin was taken into custody, he told the officers the same story he had told Isabel, that he had accidentally hit her with his car, but said that he had then strangled her when she wouldn't stop screaming, something which everybody agreed made no sense at all. After this, the detective told him that it was for the best that he come clean, as he would only have to answer to God and repent his sins. Everyone who knew Edwin said he was devout in his religion and that it was one of the most important things to him. So, the detective decided to use this knowledge to hopefully get a confession. Kaylee got out of Cameron's car and walked down the road, and when Edwin saw her, he followed her in his car. The conversation between the pair, if any, remains unknown, but somehow Kaylee ended up in the back seat of his car. Police and Kaylee's family believed that Edwin had offered her a ride, and she had accepted, believing she would be safe with a security guard in his car. Students leaving clubs or bars were often given rides home by campus security, so this likely wasn't unusual or alarming. But once Kaylee got in, she was trapped. The doors wouldn't open from the inside, and she was completely helpless. It wasn't long before Edwin started demanding that she have sex with him, and when she refused, he strangled her until she was unconscious. He then drove her several miles where he began to choke her again and hit her on the head with a rock. He then raped her. Kaylee was still alive, and Edwin grabbed another rock and hit her in the head and left her body there. It is unknown whether she was still alive at this point, which is a truly horrendous thing to contemplate. After this, he drove back to the college campus, where he changed cars and drove back later in an attempt to conceal her body. After he told them everything, officers went to locate the first car that Edwin had been driving when he went on the run, and inside were some handwritten notes, one of which read, "The place I killed her is on the B12 lot. Run her over on College Way," and another which said, "This note is to say that I am sorry for taking her life." It was after this that, near a canyon off of Highway 126, the body of Kaylee Sawyer was finally found. Despite his confession, Edwin Lara pleaded not guilty, and the prosecution announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. Edwin's lawyers argued that his rights had been violated in the interview room, as he wasn't given the option to make any phone calls while being held in custody. To everybody's dismay, during a pre-trial hearing, a judge actually threw out his lengthy and detailed confession and said that it could not be used as evidence. The prosecution was then left hoping that the forensic evidence would be enough, but it was undoubtedly a huge blow to their case. Edwin's attorney called his crime spree an enigma and said it could only be explained by his client's genetic degenerative cognitive brain disability. The prosecution said there was no doubt he was a potential serial killer and psychopath. In January 2018, in order to avoid the death penalty, Edwin changed his plea to guilty of aggravated murder and robbery. Despite the evidence they had in Kaylee's case, the charges of sexual assault did not stick. Although Edwin had pleaded guilty, he did not plead guilty to sexual assault. The county district attorney spoke with Kaylee's family and told them that their main goal as prosecutors was to put Edwin away for life, and pushing for a sexual assault conviction as well might complicate the trial and jeopardize the chances of getting a life sentence for murder. Her family begrudgingly agreed. Kaylee's mom stated, "Number 1, I want our Kaylee back home, alive and well, living her life. Number 2, I would like to see that piece of trash, the defendant, sentenced to death for what he did to Kaylee. And number 3, I would like the court system and the state of Oregon to just hand him over to me and let me carry out the death penalty." She also called Edwin Lara a monster. With this, Edwin Lara was given a life sentence without parole for the murder of Kaylee Sawyer. He later received a second life sentence for the kidnap of Andrea. Following their testimonies, Lara himself addressed the court, making an emotional plea for forgiveness. Today, I don't have much to say to you at this moment. Prayer is something I'd like to speak to, whoever is willing to listen. After Lara's speech before the court, Judge Michael Adler called Lara's actions cold-hearted beyond belief, and added that Lara was fortunate that a jury would not be sentencing him to death. The judge praised Andrea for her extraordinary courage and bravery while being held hostage. Kaylee's family filed a lawsuit against the college for failing to do an adequate background check on Edwin and for not acting upon behaviors that gave many people cause for concern. One female officer actually refused to ride in the same car as him and reported him because he scared her so much. The lawsuit also included evidence that the campus safety vehicles very closely resembled police patrol cars, and Central Oregon Community College officers were given uniforms that were also similar to the Ben police. Community officers were armed with pepper spray, ballistic vests, body cameras, and handcuffs, and drove vehicles with cages inside. The lawsuit said this simply should not be allowed, as it allowed people to abuse their position. In 2022, the Kaylee family finally entered into a settlement agreement with the Central Oregon Community College in the amount of $2 million. After a while, a wild and terrible tragedy occurred. 2 drug criminals broke into Kaylee's mother's house. Over the course of 12 months, criminals robbed many people, including Kaylee's mother's house, taking things worth $30,000, including Kaylee's ashes, which Kaylee's parents placed in a small necklace. The criminals have been caught. They pleaded guilty to 16 property crimes and were sentenced to 40 months in prison. One of the criminals confessed that he threw the necklace with Kaylee's ashes in the trash, and, unfortunately, it was never found. Kaylee's legacy also stays strong through Kaylee's Law, which was passed in 2019. Kaylee's Law requires campus security and their vehicles to be clearly distinguishable from actual law enforcement. The vehicles cannot have rooftop lights or a divider known as a cage between the front and back seats. They must have a GPS and an interior video camera that records whenever someone gets inside. Campus officers are also now prohibited from making vehicle stops or stopping and frisking individuals. National background checks and psychological testing are also required before a security officer is hired.
On a cold February morning, a young woman disappeared, leaving her family and the entire country in shock. No one could have predicted that what started as an ordinary day would turn into one of the most intricate cases. The case of Rebecca Reusch remains one of Germany's most intricate and fascinating unsolved mysteries. It is not only the tragic circumstances of her disappearance that make it so intriguing, but also the strange twists in the investigation and the conflicting theories. Rebecca Reusch, born on September 21, 2003, in the heart of Germany's capital, Berlin, led a seemingly typical life for a girl of her age. She was the youngest daughter of Bernd and Bridget Reusch, with 2 older sisters, Jessica and Vivian. While Jessica and Vivian had both moved out after getting married, Rebecca remained at home, living with her parents in the quiet neighborhood of Britz in Berlin's Neukölln district. At the age of 15, she was a student at Walter Gropius School, having recently transitioned to this institution where she was enrolled in the 10th grade. Despite her cheerful and outgoing demeanor, some of Rebecca's classmates observed a more somber side to her personality in the months leading up to her disappearance. According to these reports, Rebecca appeared to be experiencing bouts of depression, feeling uncertain about her future, and grappling with the typical adolescent search for identity and meaning in life. Some speculated that this might have been a response to the immense pressure she felt, both socially and academically. However, outside the school environment, Rebecca was known for her vibrant spirit and social nature. She thrived on making new friends, was deeply involved in social media, and amassed a large following, over 30,000 across her various platforms. Among her family, Rebecca was especially close to her older sister Jessica, who, at the time of the incident, was 27 years old. Jessica lived nearby with her husband, Florian, aged 28, and their young daughter. The relationship between the sisters was described as one of deep affection, with Rebecca frequently visiting Jessica's house on weekends to spend time with her niece, to whom she was particularly attached. The events that transpired in the days leading up to Rebecca's disappearance seemed routine, but they were anything but. On February 17, 2019, a Sunday, Rebecca asked her parents if she could spend the night at Jessica's house. Florian was attending an office party that evening, leaving the 2 sisters and Jessica's daughter alone in the house. The plan was to spend the evening watching movies and eating pizza. Rebecca's mother, Bridget, agreed to the stay on the condition that Rebecca attend school the next day. Rebecca promised she wouldn't skip class, and with that, her stay was approved. The evening at Jessica's house passed without incident. Rebecca and her sister spent the night as planned, and around 8 p.m., Rebecca sent a selfie to Vivian, their other sister. That moment would mark Vivian's last contact with Rebecca. Later that night, around midnight, Jessica went to bed upstairs while Rebecca stayed downstairs, sleeping on the living room sofa. Florian returned home from his office party around 5:45 a.m. He reported that he changed his clothes and immediately went to bed without interacting with Rebecca. Shortly after 7 a.m., Jessica woke up, dropped her daughter off at daycare, and then left for work. At around the same time, Bridget attempted to contact Rebecca to ensure she was awake and preparing for school. When the call went unanswered and went straight to voicemail, Bridget initially assumed Rebecca's phone had run out of battery. She reached out to Jessica for reassurance, and Jessica explained that Rebecca's school day wasn't due to start until 9:40 a.m., easing their mother's concerns for the time being. However, this small exchange marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal. By mid-morning, Rebecca was missing. What transpired between the hours of 5:45 a.m., when Florian came home, and 7:15 a.m., when Jessica left, remains shrouded in mystery. Between 7 and 7:46 a.m., on the morning of Rebecca's disappearance, she sent a Snapchat photo to a friend. The photo, like all on Snapchat, was automatically deleted after being viewed, so the exact time it was taken is uncertain. However, it was seen by Rebecca's friend at 8:15 a.m., providing one of the last known visual clues of her whereabouts. In the photo, Rebecca was seen in a hallway, dressed in a BTS sweatshirt with Rap Monster emblazoned on the back, a pink fleece jacket, ripped jeans, and black and white Vans sneakers. This casual outfit, typical for a teenager, would later become a focal point of the investigation, as it was the last known description of Rebecca on the morning she vanished. At 8:25 a.m., Rebecca's mother, Bridget, tried calling her daughter for the second time that morning. But once again, the call went directly to voicemail. By now, her concern had begun to deepen, sensing something was off. Rebecca usually responded promptly, even if she was at school or on her way. Worried, Bridget reached out to her son-in-law, Florian, who had returned from his office party earlier that morning, admittedly drunk and extremely tired. Although Florian heard his phone ring, he chose not to answer due to exhaustion. When Bridget couldn't reach Florian, she contacted her older daughter, Jessica, and informed her that she had been trying to get in touch with Florian, but without success. Jessica, now alarmed herself, called Florian multiple times, and after several unanswered calls, he finally picked up, woken by the persistent ringing. Jessica relayed her mother's request, asking Florian to check on Rebecca to ensure she was awake and getting ready for school. A few minutes later, Bridget called Florian again, and this time he answered. Complying with her request, he went to the living room to check on Rebecca. When he looked around, however, Rebecca was not there. He told Bridget that Rebecca was gone, which initially brought her a small measure of relief. Bridget assumed Rebecca had left for school early, perhaps running late, or simply wanting to get a head start on the day. She sent Rebecca a message that read, "Hello, my dear. I hope you arrived at school on time. I couldn't reach you. Kiss." The message showed 2 dots, indicating it had been delivered but not yet read. This gave Bridget comfort at first, thinking Rebecca was already at school and hadn't responded because her phone might have been charging or she was in class. However, as time passed and 9:40 a.m., Rebecca's first class of the day came and went. Her absence became noticeable. She hadn't shown up at school, and her teachers grew concerned. Rebecca was not the type to skip class without reason, and her absence raised alarm bells. The school reached out to her parents, hoping to clarify whether Rebecca was at home, and simply hadn't informed them of her absence. Upon learning that Rebecca had not made it to school, Bridget's concern transformed into full-blown panic. She quickly informed Barrett, Rebecca's father, who was at work, and they decided to immediately go to the police station to report their daughter missing. When Barrett and Bridget arrived at the police station, they explained the situation in detail, emphasizing that Rebecca would never disappear voluntarily. She was a responsible teenager, close with her family, and always communicated her plans. Despite the growing desperation of her parents, the police informed them that they could not officially launch a missing person investigation until Rebecca had been missing for 24 hours, as was protocol in such cases. This policy left Rebecca's parents feeling helpless, as precious time seemed to be slipping away without any action being taken by authorities. Realizing that they would need to take matters into their own hands, Barrett and Bridget decided to start searching for Rebecca themselves. Their first stop was Rebecca's school, where they searched the area around it, hoping to find some clue of her whereabouts. They approached passers-by on the street, showing them a photo of Rebecca and asking if anyone had seen her that morning. Unfortunately, no one had seen anything unusual, and there was no sign of Rebecca in the vicinity of the school. As their concern mounted, they began calling Rebecca's friends, hoping one of them might know where she was or had been in contact with her that morning. To their dismay, none of her friends had seen or heard from Rebecca, leaving her parents increasingly distressed. They also called extended family members to inform them of the situation and to widen the network of people looking for her. Desperate for any possible lead, Rebecca's family took to social media, posting about her disappearance on Facebook. The post included a clear photo of Rebecca, along with all the details they could provide: what she was wearing, her last known location, and the times when she had last been in contact with others. Their hope was that someone in the online community might have seen Rebecca or could provide a clue as to where she might be. The hours after Rebecca's disappearance were agonizing for her family. Every minute that passed without news made the situation feel more dire, as they feared the worst, but clung to the hope that she might simply turn up somewhere safe. Yet, with no sightings, no phone calls, and no leads, the uncertainty of Rebecca's fate would only deepen the mystery surrounding her case. It wasn't until February 19, the day after Rebecca went missing, that the police initiated their official search efforts. For her family, the delay was a source of deep frustration and disappointment. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime, and in missing person cases, time is critical. Yet, despite their pleas, the authorities had stuck to the 24-hour waiting period before officially starting the search. Rebecca's parents, Bridget and Barrett, were further angered by the police's actions when they began to distribute information about the missing girl. Although the family had provided multiple photos of Rebecca for public dissemination, the police chose to use an image from her Instagram account where she was heavily made up and using a filter. This particular photo made her appear much older than her 15 years, and her family worried that it could hinder any potential identification by people on the street. 2 days later, on February 21st, the German authorities officially declared Rebecca Rusch as a missing person. Along with this declaration, they provided a detailed description of the girl and what she was last seen carrying. According to their statement, Rebecca was last known to be wearing a pink jacket, a BTS sweatshirt, carrying a Vans backpack, a purple blanket, her cell phone, and even a camera. This prompted many people following the case to speculate whether Rebecca might have run away from home. The theory gained traction because it seemed like she had packed more than what was necessary for just one night at her sister's house. However, this theory was quickly debunked by the family. Rebecca often carried these same items with her everywhere, regardless of where she was going. Furthermore, there were no known conflicts within the family, and no reason that would have driven her to run away. Even the police, after initially considering the runaway angle, dismissed it due to the lack of any solid evidence pointing in that direction. By this point, Rebecca's case had garnered substantial media attention across Germany. The press began following the story closely, and the public became increasingly invested in the mystery surrounding her disappearance. On February 23, a specialized serious crime squad took over the investigation, and this marked the beginning of more intense search efforts. Over the next several days, authorities conducted thorough searches in Berlin and its surrounding areas. Every location that Rebecca might have visited was scoured, from her family's home to the homes of her sisters, from her school to her favorite hangouts. Despite the comprehensive nature of these searches, no tangible evidence or trace of Rebecca was found. Among the various individuals questioned by the police, one name quickly rose to the top of their list: Rebecca's brother-in-law, Florian. On February 28th, he was taken into custody for questioning. Florian, who had been married to Rebecca's sister Jessica for several years and was the father of her niece, suddenly found himself the prime suspect in the eyes of the authorities. He was interrogated for hours, but despite the police's suspicions, he was released the next day on March 1 without being charged. According to police theories, Florian had come home drunk in the early hours of February 18th and might have acted inappropriately towards Rebecca, with disastrous consequences. They believed he could have disposed of her afterward. Rebecca's family, however, was horrified by this suggestion. To them, Florian was a trusted and beloved family member. They argued that Rebecca had spent countless weekends at her sister's house without any indication that Florian harbored ill intentions towards her. The accusation, in their view, made no sense. The investigation pressed on, but Rebecca's whereabouts remained a mystery. Helicopters scoured the skies above Berlin, searching remote areas in case she had wandered off or been taken far away. Search dogs were brought in to try and pick up her scent, but their efforts led nowhere. As days passed without any breakthroughs, public pressure mounted, demanding answers that were not forthcoming. Then, on March 4th, the case took another dramatic turn when Florian was arrested again. The police revealed that they had uncovered inconsistencies in his testimony that further fueled their suspicions. Florian had previously claimed that after returning home from the office party at around 5:45 a.m., he had immediately gone to bed due to exhaustion. However, an investigation of his phone records painted a different picture. Authorities found evidence that Florian had been active online for several hours after his alleged return to the house. According to the police, he had sent multiple text messages to friends and had accessed adult content websites, directly contradicting his earlier claim that he had gone straight to sleep. This revelation only deepened the police's belief that Florian might have been involved in Rebecca's disappearance. Despite this new evidence, the family continued to stand by Florian, vehemently defending him against the accusations. To them, the idea that Florian could have harmed Rebecca was inconceivable. Yet, the authorities were not so easily convinced. As the investigation into Florian's activities continued, the search for Rebecca grew more desperate. While the police focused their attention on Florian, the public speculated whether someone else could have been involved, or if perhaps Rebecca had met a tragic fate elsewhere. With each passing day, the questions grew more numerous, but the answers remained elusive. For the police, Florian's inconsistent testimony about his actions on the morning of February 18 raised significant suspicions. The police were left asking themselves, why would Florian lie about such a seemingly trivial detail? In their eyes, this was not just an innocent omission, but a potential sign that he was hiding something far more sinister. This inconsistency made him the prime suspect in Rebecca's disappearance. The lack of security camera footage capturing Rebecca on her way to school further fueled their suspicion. Rebecca had planned to walk from her sister's house to a nearby bus stop, and in a modern city like Berlin, with cameras at nearly every street corner, it seemed strange that no footage of her journey had surfaced. Surveillance cameras from neighboring houses and local businesses, which were common in most urban areas, failed to record any trace of her. This led investigators to an unsettling conclusion. Perhaps Rebecca never left her sister's house that morning. The absence of witnesses or footage indicated that Rebecca's planned walk to the bus stop might not have happened at all. It seemed increasingly likely that whatever had happened to her had occurred at or near the house, not on her intended route. With Florian now firmly in their crosshairs, the police began to intensify their investigation. While Florian was in custody for the second time, the search for Rebecca Reusch continued unabated. The authorities concentrated their efforts on the natural areas around Berlin, such as forests, rivers, and lakes, where a body might have been hidden. Police officers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers scoured these locations, hoping to find some trace of Rebecca. Yet, despite the exhaustive searches, no physical evidence, no clothing, personal items, or remains were found. The family home of Jessica and Florian also became a focal point of the investigation. If the police theory was correct, this house was the crime scene where something terrible had happened to Rebecca. To explore this possibility, a specialized forensic team was dispatched to comb the house for any shred of evidence. They brought with them tools and techniques designed to detect even the smallest traces of blood, hoping to confirm their growing suspicions. In addition, trained search dogs were brought in to detect scents that might lead them to Rebecca. Despite their best efforts, the searches yielded nothing. No blood, no clues, no signs of struggle. On March 6th, Michael Hoffman, the lead detective in charge of the investigation, made a public appeal on a prominent German TV program. Standing before a national audience, he urged anyone with information about Rebecca's disappearance to come forward and contact the authorities. It was during this broadcast that Hoffman revealed a new piece of information that sent shockwaves through those following the case. The police had received credible reports that Florian had been seen driving along the A12 highway on the morning of February 18, the very day Rebecca went missing, and again the following night on February 19. To underscore the importance of this sighting, Hoffman even presented images of Florian's car captured by roadside cameras, asking viewers to report any suspicious behavior they might have witnessed involving the vehicle. This revelation further deepened the case's intrigue. The A12 highway is a major federal road that stretches from Berlin to the border of Poland, a route often used for long-distance travel. Florian's car, a cherry red Renault Twingo, had been spotted by cameras at approximately 10:40 a.m. on February 18, just a few hours after Rebecca was last seen. The vehicle was heading east towards Poland. Later that day, Florian returned home, only to make the same journey towards Poland the following night at 10:40 p.m. What was even more suspicious was that Jessica, Florian's wife, had been at work during both instances, leaving Florian as the only person who could have been driving the car at those times. The timing of Florian's trips could not have been more critical. February 18th was the day Rebecca disappeared, and the fact that Florian had driven towards Poland on that very morning only heightened police suspicions. Why would he have made such a trip so soon after Rebecca went missing, and then repeat the journey the next night? These details led investigators to formulate a disturbing theory about what had happened that morning. According to the police, it was entirely possible that Rebecca had never walked out of her sister's house to catch the bus, as she had intended. Instead, they theorized that Florian had waited until his wife, Jessica, left for work before launching a premeditated attack on Rebecca. Afterward, the police believed Florian might have concealed Rebecca's body in his Renault Twingo and driven along the A12 highway towards Poland, intending to dispose of her remains somewhere along the route. The police knew this theory was speculative, but it fit with the available evidence, or more accurately, the lack thereof. No security cameras had captured Rebecca leaving the house. No witnesses had seen her on her way to the bus stop. And now, Florian's suspicious behavior, his late-night internet usage, his untruthful statements, and his unexplained trips towards Poland seemed to point towards his involvement in something terrible. However, despite these mounting suspicions, the authorities had yet to uncover any concrete evidence that tied Florian directly to a crime. According to the authorities, the drive from Florian's home to the Polish border via the A12 highway would take a minimum of 2 hours. This was a significant piece of information, as it allowed investigators to map out potential locations where Florian might have disposed of Rebecca if, as they suspected, he was involved in her disappearance. A series of searches were conducted along the route. The map that authorities presented to the public showed several points of interest. Between March 7th and 29th, these areas were extensively combed by search teams. Despite their thoroughness, no evidence of Rebecca's whereabouts was uncovered during these operations. One of the few tangible pieces of evidence that the police could rely on came from a forensic examination of the Renault Twingo. Inside the vehicle, authorities found several strands of Rebecca's hair, along with fibers that matched the purple blanket she had with her when she disappeared. This, in the eyes of the investigators, was a critical discovery. It seemed to support the theory that Rebecca had been in the car on the day she disappeared, and that Florian might have used the vehicle to transport her after whatever had happened to her at the house. The police believed this was further proof that Florian had some role in Rebecca's disappearance, though the family remained unconvinced. Rebecca's family, particularly her father Bernd Reusch, continued to defend Florian. They saw the presence of Rebecca's hair and the fibers from her blanket as entirely normal. After all, Rebecca frequently rode in the Renault Twingo with her sister Jessica, who also owned the car. This wasn't unusual, and the family believed the authorities were jumping to conclusions based on circumstantial evidence. Barrett even addressed the press when Florian was arrested for the second time, stating that he knew why Florian had driven to Poland on the 18th and 19th of February. However, he declined to elaborate, citing that it was a personal matter, leading to more speculation from both the media and the public. Journalists relentlessly questioned Barrett, but he maintained his silence on the matter. It wasn't long before rumors began to surface about the nature of Florian's trips to Poland. A few days after Barrett's interview, one of the journalists published an article claiming that Florian had traveled to Poland for drug-related reasons. The story suggested that Florian was involved in drug trafficking, and this was the reason for his suspicious journeys across the border. Rebecca's family confirmed the reports, and Florian himself admitted to his involvement in selling drugs. He explained that his trips to Poland were to deliver a quantity of drugs to an acquaintance, not to dispose of Rebecca's body as the police had feared. Despite this revelation, the authorities couldn't find any solid evidence to link Florian to Rebecca's disappearance. On March 22, Florian was released again, his freedom secured by the absence of any direct proof connecting him to the crime. By this stage, Rebecca's case had captivated not only Germany, but also parts of Europe. Media outlets across the continent closely followed the developments, and public opinion became sharply divided. Many people struggled to understand why Rebecca's family continued to defend Florian so fiercely, despite the evidence that seemed to suggest he was involved. To some, it was clear that Florian's actions, his inconsistent testimony, his secretive trips to Poland, and the forensic evidence pointed to his culpability. Others, however, sided with the family, believing Florian's drug activities were the reason for his evasive behavior, not any involvement in Rebecca's fate. The lack of any physical evidence along the A12 highway left the German authorities questioning whether Florian might have crossed into Poland to dispose of Rebecca's body. Unable to rule out this possibility, they formally requested assistance from the Polish authorities. Polish search teams were dispatched to comb through areas near the border, concentrating their efforts on regions where Florian's car had been seen. Despite their efforts, the searches yielded nothing, and Rebecca's whereabouts remained a mystery. Aside from Florian, the investigation also looked into other potential suspects. One of the most intriguing was a 15-year-old boy known only as Max. According to Rebecca's family, Max was someone Rebecca had met online, and the two had been in communication for several months leading up to her disappearance. In fact, just a week before she vanished, Rebecca had asked her family for permission to meet Max in person. However, the family had refused, as Max lived in another city, and they were uncomfortable with Rebecca traveling to meet someone she had only known through the internet. The family believed that Rebecca, frustrated by their decision, might have skipped school on the morning of February 18th to meet Max in secret. Adding to their concerns was the suspicion that Max might not actually be a 15-year-old boy, but rather an adult pretending to be younger to lure girls online. The police took this lead seriously and launched an investigation to track down Max. However, their efforts were quickly complicated by the discovery that Max had deleted all his social media accounts just days after Rebecca disappeared. This raised red flags for the investigators, as it was unusual and suspicious behavior. Without his social media profiles, it became more difficult to locate Max and verify the nature of his relationship with Rebecca. Months of investigation followed, and eventually, the police uncovered information that contradicted the family's timeline. According to their findings, Max and Rebecca had not been in contact for over 6 months before her disappearance. This conflicted with the family's claims that Rebecca and Max were in regular communication and had been planning to meet shortly before she went missing. Despite the initial suspicion surrounding Max, the police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. They concluded that he had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance, and the investigation into him was dropped. Later on, German journalists Lena Nomer and Miriam Ars launched an investigative podcast dedicated to unraveling the mystery surrounding Rebecca Reusch's disappearance. This podcast, which drew attention nationwide, focused on interviews, case reviews, and theories that had captured the public's imagination. During the course of their research, Lena and Miriam claimed they managed to locate Max, the 15-year-old boy who was initially suspected of being in contact with Rebecca before she vanished. According to their podcast, they spoke with Max, who confirmed what the police had previously concluded. He and Rebecca had not communicated for over 6 months prior to her disappearance. Max explained that while they had once spoken every day, their conversations had dwindled gradually until they stopped altogether. One of the key points that initially raised suspicion about Max was the sudden disappearance of his social media accounts shortly after Rebecca went missing. However, Lena and Miriam mentioned that Max had no solid explanation for this, suggesting that it may have been coincidental. In addition to Max, the authorities investigated another individual, Lucas, one of Rebecca's classmates. According to Bridget Ruish, Rebecca's mother, Lucas and Rebecca had been involved in a heated argument at school just a few days before her disappearance. Concerned about the dispute, Bridget had even gone to the school to speak with Lucas, hoping to smooth things over. The police questioned Lucas as part of their investigation, but quickly ruled him out as a suspect. On the day of Rebecca's disappearance, Lucas had been at school, surrounded by other students, and there was no evidence linking him to the case. As time passed and no definitive leads emerged, a series of reported sightings of Rebecca began to surface. One of the earliest came from a woman who claimed to have seen Rebecca at a bus stop not long after she was reported missing. After this alleged sighting, other people came forward, some saying they had seen Rebecca on a bus, while others claimed she had been spotted near the city center. The police followed up on these reports, investigating the various claims, but none could be confirmed. Whether these sightings were genuine or the result of confusion, mistaken identity, or simply people seeking attention remains unknown. The lack of concrete evidence led to an array of theories about what might have happened to Rebecca. One such theory was that she had secretly traveled to South Korea to meet her idols, the members of the popular K-pop group BTS. Although this theory captured the public's imagination, especially given Rebecca's known admiration for the band, it was quickly dismissed as implausible. Traveling from Germany to South Korea as a teenager, unnoticed and unassisted, would be extraordinarily difficult. Another theory speculated that Rebecca may have fallen victim to human trafficking. Some believed that she might have skipped school to meet someone she had connected with online, which initially led investigators to focus on Max. But since Max was no longer a suspect, the theory shifted to the possibility that Rebecca had been lured by someone else. This idea seemed to hold some weight, given the rising concerns in Europe over human trafficking, but once again there was no evidence to support it. The police could not definitively prove that Rebecca had been taken against her will, and with no other online contacts coming to light, the theory remained speculative. For the police, Florian remained the primary suspect throughout the investigation. Despite being cleared and released twice due to insufficient evidence, the police repeatedly returned to the theory that Florian had something to do with Rebecca's disappearance. By 2020, the investigation reached a new stage when the prosecution requested Google to recover data from both Rebecca's and Florian's mobile phones. These records were stored on servers in Dublin, Ireland, and the authorities hoped they might reveal new leads or information. Unfortunately, when the data was returned in early 2021, it contained nothing of relevance to the case. Even with modern technological resources, the police found themselves no closer to solving the mystery. In April 2023, the police made another significant move, conducting a new search of Florian's house. This time, they performed acoustic tests, attempting to determine if Rebecca could have been suffocated inside the home without anyone hearing it. They also searched for items that could have been used to smother her. Despite these renewed efforts, nothing substantial was uncovered, leaving investigators back at square one. The disappearance of Rebecca Reusch garnered widespread attention in Germany, becoming one of the most talked about criminal cases in recent history. Missing persons expert Peter Jamin described it as one of the most highly publicized cases the country had ever seen, second only to the infamous disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The German public followed the case closely, drawn to its complexity and the numerous unanswered questions surrounding it. As with many high-profile disappearances, the case has generated a great deal of public speculation, with everyone from online sleuths to criminologists offering their own interpretations of what might have happened. In a heartbreaking interview, Barrett and Bridget Roish spoke of their deep conviction that their daughter would someday be found. To this day, they, as well as the public, wait for answers. The case remains one of the most mysterious in Germany's recent history, and the entire country wonders what happened to Rebecca Roish.